everyone, Arash Shami here. Welcome to another episode of Hashing Out the Law. Today, my guest is Doug Fifer. Doug is originally from Alaska, a native, born and raised. He spent a quiet, quiet. He spent a considerable time in the police in Alaska. He is recently retired and has written a book. But rather than me talking about Doug, I'm going to let him introduce himself and talk about himself. Doug, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me. I'll give you a little bit of a background story on myself. I was born in Homer, Alaska, which is about 270 miles south of Anchorage, which is our largest city. Homer has about 5,000 residents, so pretty small, right on the coast. Beautiful town. Uh, I grew up mainly in Anchorage as a youth, went to school there. And in 1996, I joined the Anchorage Police Department, which is the largest police department in Alaska. We have APD and then we have the state troopers, Alaska State Troopers, which many have seen on a popular TV show. So I did 25 years with the Anchorage Police Department. And what I did is I wrote a book post-retirement on the most sexually deviant cases ever committed, mainly in Alaska. But I had many specialties: crime scene investigator, hostage negotiator. So some of the stories were interactions with other law enforcement departments in the US. Some of those stories are in the book as well. So it's a unique twist on true crime, not your traditional serial killer, robbery style book, cases like that. These are the most extreme of extreme.
Now, before we get into the book, I have some questions for you about Alaska and law enforcement. So you said Anchorage has the largest police department. What is the total number of officers in Anchorage PD?
There's about 400, and you have a population that fluctuates from about 300,000 to 330,000. Keep in mind the entire state only has a population of 700,000. So most residents are located within Anchorage, and we patrol that area. Anchorage by landmass is the fourth largest city in the United States. It's a massive area to patrol.
Right. And which leads to my next question. Then you talked about the Alaska State Police. I'm assuming that unlike other states, Alaska doesn't have county sheriffs in the different counties, do they?
Exactly. No county sheriffs. There's no electable positions for police officers of the force. I've always found it strange that when you go down in the US, they actually elect sheriffs. Alaska has never done that. So it's a little bit different.
So, and I'm asking these questions for my own purposes. Uh, there's Anchorage PD. What other cities have their own police department in Alaska?
So we have some smaller towns. So even Homer, where I was born, will have a police department that can literally be 4 or 5 officers. And we have some other towns such as Palmer and Wasilla, small communities ranging from 15 to 30,000 that'll have smaller departments. Really, the two bigs though are the Anchorage Police Department and the state troopers. And really, you're certified statewide, so we can respond to anywhere. Although in Anchorage, we traditionally stay within our jurisdiction unless there's like a hostage negotiation somewhere else in the state where our team will go out and handle that.
I see. Okay. So if there's a town and they don't have their own PD, the Alaska State troopers or state police is in charge of that area, correct?
Exactly. And they'll go very remote, right? Into the interior, into the bush where there's extremely low populations, maybe villages, and they'll handle crimes within those areas.
I see. All right. So let's talk about how you got into the into law enforcement. What drove you to be a police officer?
I didn't want a 9 to 5 like corporate job. I'm an entrepreneur by heart, but I like change. I like new things. So I thought in 1996, being a young gentleman, that maybe that'd be something exciting to go into. So I applied for the Anchorage Police and the Alaska State Troopers simultaneously. Anchorage PD hired me about 5 days before the troopers offered me a job. Since I accepted it, I stayed within Anchorage and did my 25-year career. I've done a lot of other things in life, but if I could only do one thing, I would leave it as a police officer. It was the most rewarding and fulfilling career out of any thing I've done in my life.
So you were on Anchorage PD for 25 years, correct?
Right.
Right. And then when did you retire?
I retired in 21.
Okay. And when did you finish your book?
I wrote the book took me about 3 months post-retirement. Obviously, since I'd worked these cases, I knew them by heart. So the book was a fairly easy write. What I didn't anticipate is since the book has a lot of raw material in it, that the publishers would have a little bit of angst and not want to publish it. So it took me six publisher interviews before I actually got a publisher to publish the book. It's not that it's controversial. It's just that it's in its rawest form. You get it straight from the cop's eyes. Uh, exactly what happened. So it's pretty savage in its material. So a lot of publishers didn't like it. Eventually, one said, "Let's print it and run with it." Been extremely successful since.
What made you want to write it?
Well, I would often tell these stories at parties with friends who were non-law enforcement, and they would want to know about what's happening in their community, which makes sense. And so I would talk about maybe homicides, robberies, big cases that we worked, but inevitably they'd want to know what's the most deviant case. It would end up turning to sex, and then they would really dig into the details about sexual deviancy, which I found fascinating. Interestingly enough, the women would dig even deeper into those questions about exactly what happened. And to a T, they all said you should write a book post-retirement. At first, I kind of laughed at it because it's not your traditional true crime book. Yeah, yeah. But then post-retirement, I said, yeah, let me write this, put my cases in this book and see how it does.
So I didn't realize that law enforcement has the same problem that I do when you're at a party, people asking you about what's the most interesting case you've ever had. So I can relate. So let's talk about the book. Let's talk about some of these cases. Um, I know you have a number of stories in the book, but which one is, I don't want to say your favorite, but which one sticks in your mind the most?
One of the most interesting cases I worked, and this is under a chapter called Kink and Ink. It's an interesting case. I was a new officer, and we had a drug suspect that was selling on a street corner in Anchorage. He was selling heroin at the time. Heroin's one of the most popular illegal narcotics on planet Earth. It ebbs and flows in popularity, but it's always there. We have the new drugs like fentanyl, things like that. But heroin's been around a long time and it stays steady. So as a new cop, I decided I'm going to arrest this street pusher for selling dope on this street corner. So I had to sneak up on him. Eventually, I saw him make a drug deal. He ran off. I was able to tackle him and arrest him. But by law, you have to have drugs in possession. And typically, what the street pushers would do is they'd wrap the heroin in aluminum foil, keep it in their mouth. When the police came, they would swallow it. And if we didn't have any drugs we couldn't arrest, they'd either throw it up, or if they were arrested for some other charge, they would obviously get it out a different way later. Aluminum foil doesn't digest by stomach acid, or even if it passes all the way through you. So they still have the dope to sell again. So I tackled this guy, arrested him. He was swallowing the dope. I didn't have any. In the fight, I had to use pepper spray to gain control of him. Worked out well because he ended up throwing up and he threw up these little packets of dope. So I had enough to charge him. You, as a criminal defense attorney, know that. Had the drugs in possession. So I arrested him and all was good. On our paperwork, it asks suspects if they have tattoos. And that's for recognition for law enforcement. If somebody lies to us, we can verify via tattoos. He said he had a back tattoo of a woman. But at the time, I didn't know what that was. I was pretty new as an officer. So I asked him to explain what the tattoo was. He went into a long story about it. It was a prison tat. He served some time in San Quentin, one of the most notorious prisons in California. The Mexican mafia grabbed a hold of him. What I didn't know at the time is there's a large prison prostitution ring in prisons run by the Mexican mafia. He had a female tattooed on his back in exchange for sex and heroin with other inmates. So I saw this tattoo on his back. It's in the book, but it really gave me an eye awakening into the drug world on how low you can go. I'd never seen a tattoo like this. At the time, I didn't even know that people were pimped out because of their back tats in prison. But it was a unique twist where this small-time Alaska dope peddler had served time in San Quentin with the Mexican mafia and had this rather unique tattoo. Now, the story, I go much more in detail from A to Z on how that came about, but that still fascinates me to this day, how lifelike and realistic that woman's tattoo was on his back.
Right. The whole Mexican mafia and the prison gang culture in California is very fascinating to me as well. Um, so I'm going to divert a little bit on that topic and ask you, does Alaska have their own prison gangs, and are any of them affiliated with like the Mexican mafia or the Nazi lowriders or the Black Guerrilla family or anything like that?
Any prison across the U.S., it's not unique to California with the Mexican mafia. Their tentacles far reach outside of the prison walls there. They're actually in most federal and state penitentiaries. So Alaska does have it, not to the extent of these larger prisons. Since Alaska has smaller prisons, it's a little bit easier for our correctional officers to kind of keep things in check because of the populations, but they certainly have all those and more that creep into the prison systems at times. It's nonstop. It's hard to control. The drug trade, even in Alaskan prisons, is rampant. I didn't believe that when I first started that prisons could be a one-stop shop for drugs. After 25 years, I realized I was naive, and they certainly are. Whatever you can get on the outside, you can get on the inside.
Right. I know instances of people going into prison and then coming out with way more money on their books when they went in than they came out because on the inside they're providing drugs and things to other inmates. But that's a whole different story, a whole different topic we can go into. Let's get back to your book. So tell me what is the most, I don't want to say gruesome, but what's the most graphic story that you have in your book?
Well, I have a chapter, it's called The Last Climax. It doesn't take a lot of thought to figure out where that goes. These are going to be autoerotic or fetishes or paraphilias where the individual dies. So in this chapter, everybody dies. The Grim Reaper comes for them all. These are some really, really strange cases. One of them that I talk about is most people know about the Hells Angels, and they have groups all over the United States and chapters. They ride Harley Davidsons. They're in criminal enterprise. Not all of them, but a lot of them are in criminal enterprise. So we had a lieutenant in the Hells Angels that died from autoerotic asphyxiation in his house, and that's where you restrict oxygen via belt, where you pin it to the ceiling or something, and that lack of oxygen increases your orgasm. But he was a high-ranking individual, but it was quite unique how he set this up and the depths he went into to plan this autoerotic asphyxiation on himself. It's mostly accidental, meaning these individuals don't intend to die. It's just that something happens where the belt doesn't give loot breakaway or the rod or whatever they hook themselves to, and they end up dying. So those are really unique, really gruesome. Happens a lot more than the public thinks. You don't really hear about those cases. They're not public. They don't go in the news media. Families keep them very quiet, obviously. But those always fascinated me, and they're very common.
Do those people get charged in Alaska with voluntary manslaughter, or and what do they get charged with? I'm sure they don't charge them with murder.
Yeah, if you're the only suspect or individual in that and you die, there's no charges,
Right.
right? If somebody assisted you in autoerotic and it went bad, certainly could be some charges.
Okay.
But
Uh,
typically those individuals are alone. And you know what's unique is they like to videotape themselves. And from an investigator standpoint, you talk about watching these videos of somebody dying live. It's it's very hard to take because when you suffocate your body and your cells start to explode from lack of oxygen, you don't die quickly. These can be 2 or 3 minute sagas of somebody dying. But they love to videotape themselves, but those are always difficult to watch. Somebody's life being lost, not intentional, but uh, it's fascinating the extent that they go through to tape these, and they get gratification by watching themselves later in these videos, is why they do it.
I can't imagine watching those videos. Let me ask you this: were you assigned to the sex crimes division?
Yeah, what I would do is early in my career, we had our sexual assault division. And so I would be part of a team that would actively collect DNA from suspects, interview them, process crime scenes, things like that, and also bring charges to fruition if we could. But I worked that unit for a while. It's a lot to take. So my flavor was to go in a unit 4 or 5 years, go on to something else, kind of cross train yourself in all areas of law enforcement, makes you a better cop. Also doesn't burn you out on specific crimes because they can get taxing.
I could imagine being in that. I have a copy of your book. You were kind enough to give me a copy of your book, and I'm looking at it, and you have a chapter of necrophilia, and then you have a chapter bestiality. Um, I can't help myself, but I have to ask you this question. The bestiality chapter, do any of these stories involve wild animals that are native to Alaska?
Yeah, they do. Most of them are about Alaska. I do touch on some cases throughout the U.S. And for your listeners, bestiality is worldwide. Back before the World Wide Web, it was clandestine, hidden. Now it's out everywhere. You have these forums where people meet up and they talk through it, share videos, things like that. So it's exploded. I think the current stats are arrests on bestiality have increased 3,000% in the last decade. There'll be a lot more arrests as investigators get a little smarter on interview techniques, as more information comes out, and we can track these individuals. One unique case involves an Alaska animal called our moose. While those aren't only found in Alaska, they're found, in Maine, New York, things like that. The largest moose on planet Earth are from Alaska. They range in excess of 1,600 pounds. We had a case where a moose had died for unknown reasons, and there was individual that engaged in bestiality with the deceased moose for several days, even built like a makeshift wall around it so he could continue to engage in these activities. Again, when animals die and bodies rot, this isn't a pleasant experience. So that type of human psyche and behavior fascinates me because I don't even know how they do it, first of all. Secondly, the smell of a rotting corpse, whether it's human or animal, is unbelievable. I hope most of your listeners have never smelled it, but I have. So these type of individuals, as an investigator, really fascinate me on how they get to where they're at. But that's one of the more unique cases, but it spans the gamut of pigs, dogs, horses, everything you can imagine.
Which story is that? What's the name of the story in your book?
Yeah, that one is I'd have to actually look. It's under moose molester, but
Okay.
yeah, there's several of them. We've got a story about a dog, a horse, a pig, the moose, and a few others.
That I think you ruined my lunch for me. I can't get it out of my mind. The other thing, you could put that story under bestiality or necrophilia. It could go under either of them.
It can. What that story goes under is actually, I mean, I don't want to get too much into terms, but it's actually called necrobestiality. So I define that in that chapter because uh, that's a real perverse and sickening behavior, right? To prey on dead animals for the act of sex to gratify you. Again, necrophilia on humans, I think there's no greater crime ever committed. I mean, that's really getting way out there. And these individuals obviously have some mental health issues.
Yeah, they do. It's I always been fascinated with criminal defense because, serial killers and stuff like that. I want to know what's going on through their mind. I never thought about sexual deviance and what's going through their mind, but your book is opening new frontiers of of the criminal mind for me. Now, for the viewers and for the listeners, some of the stories are, and these are different chapters, but some of the stories are man's best friend, cool as a cucumber. That's one of my favorites. The bad bunny, uh, hold the anchovies. What's hold the anchovies about?
Old Anchovies is one that has curtailed my pizza ordering for life. So what happened with this one is it's one of the top three pizza delivery companies in the world. I'll let your listeners kind of deduce on which company that would be. Uh, we had neighbors that called us on a individual in a truck. He had the pizza delivery sign on top of his truck. He parked at the end of a cul-de-sac in this really nice neighborhood, and he'd been there for a while. So neighbors thought that was suspicious, as you know, in law enforcement, they'll call you for a number of things. We go out and just make sure that individual is okay. Why are they sitting there for so long? Uh, so what I thought is it would probably be, he's taking a rest. He got out to use the bathroom, something like that. Nothing big. When I got there, the vehicle was kind of fogged up. In Alaska, that's an indication that Could be somebody having sex in the vehicle, with the windows fogged. So my partner and I, we got out, we went up there, and we don't often, we don't announce ourselves. We want the element of surprise as police officers, so we're safe. So we kind of snuck up on the vehicle and looked in the window, and it was fogged up. I couldn't quite tell what was happening inside it. I figured there'd be two people. Ended up just being one. That was the pizza delivery guy. And there was pizza boxes on the passenger side of the truck bed. What he was doing, he was actively trying to masturbate. He had no idea we were there, which fascinated me. And I don't know, I told my partner, look in, are you seeing what I'm seeing? He said yes. So eventually, after a minute or two, we called this guy out. Freaked out, he jumped out, pants down. I was like, okay, pull your pants up. We'll talk through this. He immediately said I did something bad. Now, what I was anticipating as a cop, that masturbation in your truck could kind of be bad. So that's what I thought he was talking about. I explain a lot in greater detail in the book, but long story short, there was a female that ordered pizza 3 or 4 times a week. He had a crush on this female. What he would do before he delivered the pizza was actively masturbate onto the pizza, ejaculate onto the pizza, smear it in, and then deliver it to her. He would thus park down the street, actively try and masturbate again. He couldn't in this case because he had just done the deed, but he was thinking about it. It excited him so much. I had to go to that citizen's house and explain what had happened. The district attorney, as you know, wanted the pizza collected as evidence. Uh, Unfortunately, there was no pizza left, so the evidence had been consumed. What I thought is we would be on national news. I thought we could arrest this guy. The district attorney quickly came back and said, there's no viable charge unless he has some type of communicable disease, such as AIDS, something like that, which impossible to tell at the time. We literally had to write up the report and release this individual after such a crime. Now, because of that case, Alaska has now enacted a criminal charge if you do something like that. But at the time, you didn't. What I thought is that the national news would come calling. And in our police department, we had a betting board on how much this settlement would be once she sued this pizza company. Big business came in, they came calling. They settled with her with a non-disclosure. No charges were ever brought. I knew at the time it was in excess of 7 figures, her settlement. So that's the story of that one. I have never eaten takeout pizza delivered since that day.
I think you ruined pizza for me. And usually today's Wednesday. Wednesday is pizza night.
Well, buy your pizza and cook it yourself. That's my best advice.
I'm
That's what
afraid
I do.
I'm afraid to ask you of the other cases. I believe making bacon is about you. You mentioned the pig, so I believe that one is there. A stable relationship. Is that a donkey or a horse?
That's a horse. You're
Horse.
tracking real well on these. What one case I'll talk about since you mentioned serial killers. As a hostage negotiator, I've actively negotiated and then interrogated serial killers. Alaska per capita, which your listeners might not know, has the most serial killers from any place on Earth. So while it's one of the most beautiful areas in the world, it's also one of the most dangerous. That has a lot to do with our low population. So you get into that per capita math equation. But one serial killer named Israel Keys committed a homicide on an 18-year-old barista. This is a rather unique case in Alaska. He would also travel to the lower 48, commit homicides, fly back to Alaska. Eventually, he couldn't stop his craving to kill in Alaska. He knew better than to kill at home, but he couldn't stop it. So he kidnapped her, uh, sexually assaulted her, ended up strangling her to death. In his back shed, his girlfriend and his daughter lived 20 feet from the shed. Left her in there, went on a Caribbean cruise for 2 weeks. This was in February in Alaska, gets, below zero. When he came back, he thawed her out and then intimated to our investigators that he had then had sex with the corpse. So serial killers have a real link towards necrophilia. And I'm not saying all of them, but if you look at Ted Bundy, the Green River Killer, all of those had sex with corpses post-mortem. So there is a link between serial killers and necrophilia. Uh, it's quite unique, and in my experience, it holds true.
I think that serial killers, if they are put to death, their brains should be studied. I honestly do. And I think the ones that are in prison should voluntarily let them be um, evaluated beyond their normal psychological evaluation because uh, there has to be something going on for them to do what they do. That has to be, and I think the only way that can be explained is through scientific research. But that's a whole different story. Uh, the Crisco Kid, does that have anything to do with butter?
Well, it's actually you have to do with Crisco, the vegetable
Yeah,
shortening, and
yeah.
what that is, that's a chapter 7. The book's pretty intense, as you've already heard. So you almost need a break after reading this book because this is the real deal. So the last chapter, it's called Teachable Tidbits, and what I do is I provide readers the opportunity on some things I learned in law enforcement that are legal and safe that you could probably incorporate into your sex life that you hadn't thought about. The Crisco kid was a unique individual. We discovered him. He was parked in a vacant lot next to houses. The neighbors said he was trespassing. He shouldn't be there. When we walked up to the truck, he jumped out and ran back and said everything was fine. We said, no problem. We got to check the truck. Again, it was fogged up, indicating maybe somebody having sex in the vehicle. So we told him, hey, we'll just check the truck, make sure the other individual's okay, and we leave. It's no big deal. Maybe pick a different place to have sex. He said, no, no, I don't want you to check the truck. It's fine. We have a duty as law enforcement to make sure everybody's okay. So the other officer went to go past him and he grabbed the officer. That's a big no-no in police work. You don't grab us. So he was subsequently handcuffed, sat down, and the other officer went to check on the other individual in the vehicle. There wasn't anybody else in the vehicle. He came back and told me, go have a look for yourself. You're not going to believe this. When a cop does that, it's probably pretty extreme. So I walked up there not knowing what to look for. And at first, I didn't know what I was seeing. What it was a women's porn magazine. It was a giant butcher knife. It was a can of Crisco, and it was tissues. So what he was doing is he was actively masturbating while he was stabbing this butcher knife into this porn magazine, slashing women over and over again to excite himself. He was 19 years old. A little bit awestruck that he had that type of behavior being so young. What I thought is maybe the Anchorage Police Department, we could create like a felony suppression unit, follow individuals like this because they're certainly going to offend again, and stop the crime. We're here to serve and protect. What I didn't realize is a little naive, and as a criminal defense attorney, you could take 400 Alaska cops, put them on 400 individuals, and you need 1,000 more to track them. So it's not practical, but I was young and not too smart. So in teachable tidbits, this is more of an extreme case, but you could probably use Crisco instead of lotion. Like that's a legal and justifiable way. There's a cough drop chapter in there where people may not envision the use of cough drops. I learned that on a call as well. So those are all kind of humorous, but real things that people do that aren't really illegal, but a little bit strange.
The gummy bear affair. Let me ask you about the Crisco Kid. Did he ever come in contact with law enforcement again for a crime?
Great question. So I tracked the Crisco kid on my own. He never came across against, law enforcement. Reports I checked, never really heard from him again. In the book, you ask a great question. I reached out to my law enforcement associates in FBI, criminal profilers. I had them actually write a criminal profile on the Crisco kid to see where he may have ended up. I don't know to this day where he's at. I'm guessing he didn't turn out to be a productive citizen. You never know. But I'm guessing he was a predator in the making. So I actually documented that. You can read the case profile uh, in the book. It's quite fascinating and what the FBI profiler says he may or may not have done. You never know, but it's an interesting read.
It's very fascinating. I'm gonna do uh, some weekend reading, but let me ask you this: um, what was your favorite role as law enforcement? I know all these cases were interesting and everything, and I know you're a hostage negotiator and everything. Of all the roles, different hats you put on, which one was your favorite?
Yeah, I did a bunch, like I said. Crime scene investigator, I liked. Really, that's a team that goes out. You're the first check on whether something's a homicide or maybe it's not. Very important team to be on to see what's on the up and up, to see if we need to call additional investigators. I did that for 4 years. I loved it. But after 4 years, all I could do is that famous line where I see dead people. In my mind, that's all I saw. It's emotionally, it's hard to take because that's all you go on is calls with dead people. So after 4 years, I left that. I enjoyed it because it's forensically mapping crime scenes is difficult. It's not like you see on CSI where you just walk in and find this hair in the back of the room. I might be on my hands and knees for 18 hours collecting evidence. So it's not a glamorous position. It's very difficult. So I did like that team, but by far and away, my favorite duty as a cop was as a hostage negotiator. A couple of reasons for that. It's a chess match with that individual to get them out safely, to protect society, to protect any potential victims or hostages they have, and also to protect law enforcement, my fellow officers who are around the area and may be in jeopardy of harm. That was my favorite. And again, like I said, I spent the gamut of my career as a team leader with our negotiator team, and I loved it. So that's one that I always remember. One of the stories in the book, it's called the one you mentioned, the Bad Bunny. That's an actual Playboy bunny, the centerfold of Playboy bunny that I negotiated, who wanted to commit multiple homicides in Anchorage. She certainly had some mental illness. I didn't believe she was a Playboy bunny when I was first on the phone with her. After the arrest, we went in her house, and sure enough, she had pictures with Hugh Hefner. She had her centerfold framed above her bed. She was the real deal. So it's not often as a cop, especially in Alaska, that you get the chance to negotiate with somebody who's been featured in Playboy, especially as a centerfold. So that was quite interesting. But law enforcement, you never know what you're going to get.
Very interesting. We're talking about Doug's book, Shades of True Crime, Sex, Drugs, and Killer King. Doug, will you be writing any more books after this one, do you think?
Yeah, I think I will. This one's been hugely popular. So whether it's a follow-up on this or perhaps some more traditional true crime, such as my interactions with serial killers in Alaska, or both, depending on the order of this one, I certainly will read more books. If you go to my website, dougfifer.com, that's just DOUGFIFER.com, you can watch the book trailer. You can also sign up for future books that I'll write.
We'll be sure to include the link to Doug's website in the comment section or in um, the description of the podcast, depending on if you're listening to it or watching it on the platform you are. Doug, where can we buy your book? I'm sure we can buy it at your website, correct?
Yeah, you can go on the website. I've got links to Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Apple Books, really anywhere books are sold, you can find this book. If Amazon's the easiest for you, that's a great place, but it's everywhere.
Great. Um, it's been a pleasure, Doug. I wish I had more time because I would like to go over all these stories with you. But at the same time, I don't want to give away the stories. I want people to actually go buy the book and read them. Um, is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off to the potential readers of your book?
Yeah, I would, I hope that they buy it, of course, but I think they'll appreciate it. Like I said, I keep going back. It's a unique twist on true crime. I like to tell everybody, after you read this, you're going to wonder what your neighbors do next door. You're going to wonder what your boss does. You're going to wonder about your best friend. These are everyday community members that commit these crimes. It's fascinating, but it's everywhere in the United States and the world. So it'll be very eye-opening for your listeners and your readers.
Thank you, Doug. Again, Shades of True Crime. Oh, I'm sorry, 50 Shades of True Crime, Sex, Drugs, and Killer King by Doug Fifer. Doug, it's been a pleasure. I will be reading your book, and once I'm done, I'm going to send you an email of what I think of all the stories.
Perfect. I'd love to hear from you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.